Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to my monthly reflections, where we'll talk about the decks that I worked with throughout the month of January. So January was actually a really busy month for me, and I had intended to do one of the tarot challenges on Instagram, and I just completely ran out of time because I was trying to set up things for the next few months for my channel and some of my business stuff. So I don't have any decks to talk about in terms of what I used for challenges this month because I actually didn't do any challenges this month, but hopefully I'll be able to get back to that next month. So let's go ahead and jump into the decks that I used each week. So for each week, I use a different one tarot, one oracle, and these tend to be decks that I use for my weekly readings. As of last year in 2019, I was using them for daily draws. But in this year, in 2020, I'm actually using my decks to do some more expansive readings throughout the week. And it's been a really great practice and I've really enjoyed it. And you'll see more of that in my upcoming journaling video. So for the first week, I used the World Spirit Tarot and the Earthbound Oracle. Now, I did also trim my World Spirit Tarot, which I showed in a video very recently. And these two decks are really work wonderful together. And I do really like the World Spirit trimmed now. It's so much easier for me to work with. I did take the titles completely off. And I did also edge it in multiple colors, which again, I showed in my video, so you can see it there. And I think that for the most part, it's working really well for me. There are pictures in the guidebook, so if I come across a card that I'm like not sure exactly what it is, I can always double check that in the guidebook. But these two decks together worked really well, and I like the pairing of the kind of, I don't want to say busier, but more detailed artwork in the World Spirit combined with the kind of more minimalistic art style of the Earthbound Oracle. And I like to have those contrasting pairs because I think they work really well together. And the messages that I get from the Earthbound Oracle are always very succinct, and it's one of my favorite decks to use. And working together, they worked pretty well. They do, I think, look better in kind of bigger spreads versus just what I did a lot of the time was kind of pull a couple of cards and then, pull some cards to kind of expand on that meaning. And that worked really well for these particular decks. That works really well together. And I think that they do work really well together in a one-on-one kind of setting as well. But really where I found that these two decks kind of shined was in those sort of larger readings with the expanded cards. They are very powerful decks in their own rights as well. One of my favorite cards. And how beautiful are those two together? So that is the World Spirit Tarot and the Earthbound Oracle. So the next week I worked with the Wild Unknown Tarot and the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck. Now if you've watched some of my previous like deck collection videos and things like that, I've mentioned the Wild Unknown Tarot before, and it wasn't a deck that I was really able to connect with. Something about it just kind of missed the mark for me. I do think the artwork is gorgeous, and I think it's a beautifully produced deck, but it just wasn't connecting for me personally. So I put it aside, but it wasn't a deck that I was like wanting to get rid of. I don't know. Every time I did a deck purge, I would take a look at this deck and I'd say, no, I feel like I need to keep it. And I feel kind of like maybe I needed to keep it because it was waiting for the Archetypes deck. This is, of course, a modified version. I do have a video on this as well on my channel. I do not like round decks. I've come to that conclusion. Round decks just do not work for me. So I took this deck and made it a different shape so that I could get my hands around it. But these two decks really work well together. I found that the Archetypes deck works well with a lot of different decks actually, but I do really enjoy working with them together. And I like the kind of blend of the different art styles that we see in the Archetypes deck, and it kind of helps kind of tie it into the art style of the Wild Unknown. And of course, they're just, they're beautifully designed decks. I really do appreciate Kim Krantz's artwork. I just wasn't able to really work with the Wild Unknown. Look how beautiful those are together. I just really wasn't able to work with the Wild Unknown before then. And I think it took me kind of getting the Archetypes deck, working with it, and then deciding to give the Wild Unknown a try again. And it's connecting with me a little bit better. I'm not going to say that it's one of my favorite all-time decks. It's definitely not going to be one of my go-to decks. But it's definitely one that I can work with a little bit easier now. And I feel a little bit more comfortable working with. Not that I wasn't uncomfortable working with it before. I can read with it just fine. It just didn't make any personal connection for me. And I feel like maybe alongside the Archetypes deck, it does kind of have a little bit of a better connection for me now. And I don't know if that makes any sense, because it really doesn't, right? There's no real logic to it. It's all just how it feels in the moment, how it feels when you work with it. But I think that half of my deck is upside down. But I think that together, these decks are just absolutely beautiful. I really enjoyed reading the Archetypes book. For me, that was a huge, the story about how it came about, the kind of personal narrative that Kim Krantz included in the guidebook, I think really helped solidify my connection to this deck, and kind of helped me to see it in a different light. And I really did appreciate that. And it made me want to work with it even more. And this is a deck that I've pulled out multiple times now. So 2 beautiful decks. I really liked working with them together. So that is the Wild Unknown Tarot and the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck. So the next 2 decks that I worked with are my Solera Culto Tarot, which is a deck that I have again modified, and the Messages from the Light Meditation deck. So I think these 2 decks are really wonderful. I have trimmed my Solera Culto and I've edged it. I've done the modification on this particular deck, and I do have a video on it, which I will try to remember to link in the description box below. And I love the art style of this deck. It's so amazing. It's, I don't want to say your typical, but it is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, basically. It follows that system, but it does have some little places where it goes its own way that I really appreciate. And overall, I think that these 2 decks worked well together, but I really think that some of my other Oracle decks that are a bit more along this art style would have been a little bit better. But I really do like the messages that I get from the Messages from the Light deck. So I think that it does work really well overall. But what's really beautiful is when you take a single card and you lay your cards around it and provide your message, receive your message that way. And that, for me, doing these 3 card spreads really worked wonderfully for working with these 2 decks together. I really enjoyed the messages that I got. And the 3 card spread is kind of a staple of my reading. I think that it's a really powerful and really important spread to use. And I don't think it necessarily matters what you assign to each position. I like just having 3 cards because it kind of gives me a basic reading, but it also expands on more than just the single card draw. There's more here to dive into. And a lot of times I think 3 cards is really all you need to get a message. So I really enjoyed working with this deck in this way. I did also do some larger readings with the Solera Culto, which I really enjoyed. And they're just gorgeous decks. I love the artwork in this deck. I love the art style. And it's a wonderful little reader. I've trimmed all the titles off of it, but I have no trouble reading with it because, again, it is very Rider-Waite-Smith, so everything's very recognizable. And it is a gorgeous deck, and I actually do really like the cardstock. I think some people have, they re-released a different edition of this deck. In fact, it was sent to me, and I passed it on to a friend because I like the cardstock, and I like... well, I had already actually modified this deck when I received my my other edition of it. And that was really cool, actually. I do have to say that was actually pretty cool that I bought this deck, and it is a fairly expensive deck, so it was much appreciated to get the second edition of it, I guess you could say, without even having to ask, without even having to buy it. But I like the cardstock better on the first edition, to be perfectly honest with you. But anyway, and I don't have it here to show you because, as I said, I passed it on. So it was been a really great experience with not only working with this deck, but in purchasing it and having the creators be so mindful and attentive to the issues that some people had with the deck. So I really do appreciate that, and I just want to give a little shout out to them for, you know, props to you for being really on top of things. Although, just in my personal opinion, I prefer this cardstock. The colors look fabulous on it, and it shuffles much better. But the other one is a little bit more like this kind of cardstock, a little bit more cardboardy. Anyway, total tangent aside, the Solera Culto Tarot was a deck that I definitely enjoyed working with it, and it's one that it's going to be, you know, probably frequently showing up in my rotation. So that's the Solera Culto Tarot and the messages from the Light Meditation deck. So I think one of my favorite pairings this month, well, it's kind of a tie between these two decks that I used in, I think it was the second to the last week of January, and the decks that we're going to see here in a minute. These two decks paired beautifully together, and I was really kind of blown away by the way that they interacted with each other. And that is, of course, the Moon Void Tarot and the Flowers of the Night Oracle. I need to make a bag for my Moon Void Tarot. It still doesn't have one. Because you know me, I'm not, this kind of box is fine. I'll keep a deck if it comes in a nice box like this. But the tuck boxes, you know, that just doesn't really work for me. But anyway, even the backs of the cards are like wonderfully compatible. How gorgeous are those? At any rate, these two decks really kind of blew my mind on how well they worked together. And it just, I love that contrast of the different colors. It's so beautiful. The messages were really in sync with these two, which I really appreciate. And this was the first time I had ever used the Moon Void Tarot. So I was really, really pleasantly surprised by it. I wasn't sure about this deck because this character is, I believe, maybe based on the creator, or I'm not sure. It could be a fictional character. I didn't actually read it, and I probably should have. But I know this same character, this deck follows the character through the kind of story of the tarot. We can see her here again in the Nine of Pentacles. And I wasn't sure that I was going to connect with that. And especially because this person is very, very young, and I don't tend to connect with decks that have super young people in them because they look like my kids to me. I mean, my kids are, you know, young adults and well, actually adults. And sometimes when I see decks with younger people in it, it just kind of makes me feel like it's my kids, and I'm sorry, I love my kids, but, you know, kind of getting guidance from my kids, I don't know. Anyway, doesn't really work for me in general, but for this deck, it actually did work quite well. And even though the character in it was a little bit younger, I was still able to really connect with it, and it's really gorgeous. Love this Queen of Pentacles. That's my card. So happy when it's a card that I really like. So yeah, like even here we see this is a very young kind of, you know, slim, young, pretty little girl, and sometimes that really disconnects for me, but it works well enough for me in this deck, and I really like the simplicity. Again, I don't want to say simplicity. The minimalist style of the artwork, I think, is really beautiful, but there's still a lot to unpack in this deck, which I think is really great. And I do really like this Death card. I mean, how beautiful is that? It's just an absolutely gorgeous card. So anyway, I was really pleasantly surprised by the Moon Void Tarot. And again, one of the things that I really enjoyed about this deck was the messages that I received in like a 3-card reading. Because these two decks pair together really well for 3-card readings. Look at this. We have the Tower, Death, and the High Priestess. I mean, how beautiful. And it's just, it really is a gorgeous pairing. I guess I was surprised. I shouldn't be, but I was surprised by the Moon Void Tarot in a very good way. And so that's always exciting for me when I find a deck that I'm not really expecting to connect with, and then I do connect with it. And I think that's really lovely. So yeah, just again, with these 3-card readings, really powerful, really succinct messages that just works really well. So that's the Moon Void Tarot and the Flowers of the Night Oracle. So the last 2 decks that I work with for my weekly readings were the Wanderer's Tarot and the Sacred Destiny Oracle. And these were another, I should say the Wanderer's Tarot was a deck that surprised me. Just in the fact that I enjoyed reading with it more than I thought I was going to. I love the simplistic art style. I should probably show you the backs of these cards, right? And then we have the Sacred Destiny. And I know this deck has made its appearance on a lot of different channels. I do have to say that I'm not 100% convinced about the Sacred Destiny Oracle. Just to be perfectly honest with you. The Wanderer's Tarot, it's not a deck that I see very often. This was a deck that was sent to me by the lovely Barbara. And I really like these line drawn on the black, this stark contrast, again, I hate to say simplistic, the minimalistic art style is really beautiful. And it's a deck that I've quite enjoyed working with. It's even like edged in black, which is really beautiful. I love the line work. To me, this is like, it looks like a bullet journal in a deck, which is kind of cool. And I really enjoy that. It's a little bit large for me, to be perfectly honest. A little bit hard for me to get my hands around and work with, but I thought about trimming it, but it's already edged in black and I just don't want to take off that edging and redo it. And yeah, so that's where we're at with that. Now the Sacred Destiny, I think it's a beautiful deck. It's a photo manipulated deck, and sometimes there are just some misses in there that really kind of, I don't know. You know how I am about the photo manipulation. Anyway, some of the cards are really beautiful and I really enjoy working with them, and the messages are really great, and some of them just don't quite make it for me. However, these 2 decks together, again, we have that contrast, that black and white, that very minimalistic art style with the much more elaborate settings, which are just like, here we have the Hangman and Potential. Beautiful. The Philosopher of Knives and Courage. I mean, they do work really well together. 2 of Knives and Power. How beautiful. The World and Opportunity. You just can't get much better than that. Judgment and Flow. I could sit here and do this with this whole deck. 3 of Feathers and Blessing. Okay. Anyway, sometimes it's just fun to just sit and flip through the decks like that, and just to get that kind of in the moment reading, and that moment message is so beautiful. Anyway, like this is one that just kind of a little bit misses the mark for me, but at any rate, it's a gorgeous pairing. Now, really funny with this deck is with the Wanderer's Tarot. The first deck that I tried to pair it with, it was like, nope, not having it. I can't even remember what Oracle deck I tried to use. It just like, I don't know, there was something off. It didn't feel right. It wasn't working for me. And so I ended up switching to the Sacred Destiny Oracle, which was not the Oracle that I had intended to pair with it. But I'm so glad that it worked out that way, because these decks together are just so beautiful. And I love the messages that I got from them. And I love that contrast. It just works so well for me. So again, I did a lot of the 3-card readings, putting things in the wrong spot, mixing up my decks. And they're just beautiful together. So I really enjoyed this whole process of getting to know both of these decks. These were both decks that I hadn't used before, and so I was really pleasantly surprised with working with them. And the, wonder if I can find it. There is the first 2 pulls that I did with this deck. I've now mixed all my cards together, so I'm gonna have to fix that. I like the cardstock on this. This is that new Hay House cardstock. I really like it, except for it kind of sticks together a little bit. But it's fabulous cardstock. Hay House has been doing a fabulous job with their Oracle decks. Apparently their tarot not so much, although I don't have the Light Seers tarot. Anyway, this Voyage card. This card, the first 2 draws I did with the Sacred Destiny, and I did them a couple days apart, or like 1 day apart, maybe 2 days. And I pulled this card twice. So this card definitely has something to say to me, I guess. And the fact that it's just whales kind of just endeared this deck to me a little bit. But, you know, I really do like it. I think it's really beautiful. Love this card. There are some cards in here that are just really fabulous, and some of them that just, like I said, missed the mark a little bit for me, but that's just me personally. And now look what I did. Wait, can we find it? Put some of my Wanderer's tarot in with it. Oh, you know, it's the end of January, and it's just gonna be one of those things. So that was the Wanderer's Tarot and the Sacred Destiny Oracle. Now there were a couple of other decks that I worked with throughout the month, and some of them that I plan on working with throughout 2020, so you will be seeing them probably repeatedly in most of my monthly reflections. The first of the decks that I started working with is the Devas of Creation, and basically how I've been working with this deck is just to pull a card. Made a little bag for it. How I've been working with this deck is just to pull a card, it's upside down for some reason, and let it sit on my table. It's like my current one is just right here off camera. And I'm just letting these images kind of sit with me. I read about them in the book, and then I do a little bit of journaling, which we'll see again in the next video with my journal. And for the most part, I've just been kind of letting these devas hang out on my table with me and provide some guidance here and there. I see them all day long throughout the day. And so it's been really wonderful just to have it there to kind of provide a little bit of inspiration is really what I'm getting at, I guess, because this is, you know, sitting at my craft table, my reading table. And whenever I look up and I see one of my devas sitting right there, it just reminds me to be, you know, to tap into that creative energy within me. It's a huge part of my practice. It's a huge part of my life overall. And being able to connect with these cards in that way, I absolutely adore this card. It's one of my favorites. So that is the Devas of Creation. And speaking of created cards, I do want to give a quick little shout out. This is the Cup of Contemplation cards by our very own Julie at Peekaboo Rose. And this was a deck that Julie has available on Make Plain Cards. So I, of course, made sure that I got that. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck. This is such a wonderful little deck. It's great if you're not sure what you want to do a reading on. And I've done that a couple of times with this deck. I pull one of these cards and then I do a reading around it. And it's really been beautiful. These would also make really great journal prompts if you were looking to do some journaling. And of course, the artwork is really cute. So props to Julie for a wonderful deck. I think it's really cute. The prompts on it are really wonderful. I love all the colors that she used, and the little cups with all the different little pictures on them are really wonderful. So wonderful little deck, Julie. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I believe that Julie has a full walkthrough on her channel, which I will link in the description box below. So that is the Cup of Contemplation cards. And finally, the last decks that I want to talk about today are the decks that I've been using for my moon readings. So I've been doing Ethany's Tarot by the Moon readings for a couple of years now. And it's just one of my favorite parts of my practice. The prompts are wonderful. I love that Ethany puts everything together for you so that you don't really have to search for anything. It's in a wonderful PDF. I'll link it in the description box below. And for this, I am using primarily my Dark Goddess Tarot and my Dark Days Tarot. So these are the two decks that I am using exclusively for my moon readings this year. And I've also pulled in the Moonology cards, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So of how I've been doing my moon readings is I use Ethany's prompts, and I'll talk about this more when we take a look at my journal as well. And what I've been doing is I've been pulling a Dark Goddess. This deck is currently out of print, but I believe it is being, or it has been picked up by a mass publisher and will be out at some point. And you can bet I'm going to be getting an extra copy of it because I absolutely love this deck. The artwork is really amazing, and I love the messages that I get from it. So basically what I do is I pull one of these Dark Goddesses to serve as my focus for my reading. So I am following Ethany's prompts, but this card serves as my focus. Then I use my Dark Days Tarot to do the prompts from the actual reading. And these together just make for gorgeous spreads. Let's move this one out of the way. Just take a look here. So I would pull one of these cards, and then I would do my cards around it. I'm going to run out of room. I need a bigger table. So this would be my focus for my reading, and then I'd have my Dark Days cards around it to provide the messages for the prompts. And it just makes for a gorgeous reading together. I love both of these decks, like a lot. They are both wonderful decks to work with. And I am primarily using them for my moon readings, and they are both working really well for that. And then how I've been using my Moonology cards is just to pull whatever card relates to the spread I'm doing. So if it's like the full moon in Cancer spread, then I pull out the full moon in Cancer card and I just lay it somewhere in my spread. And then this card gets put up on my board to stay with me until the next reading, as well as my Dark Goddess stays with me on my tarot board, and so that I can connect with that throughout that time period. And then when the next either new moon or full moon, whatever is next, rolls around, then I switch those out. And so this deck it's one that like goes, to be perfectly honest, it goes in and out of my trade pile all the time. And I really like the artwork. It doesn't work for me as like an oracle. I've tried using it just as a straight up oracle, and it really doesn't work for me. And I do really like the artwork, and that's really the only reason why I'm keep hanging on to it, is because I think the artwork is really cool. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try using it this way this year and see if that works for me and if that's something that adds to my practice. I do have the book Moonology, so when I pull one of these cards to go along with whatever reading I'm doing, I also pull up the Moonology, the actual full book, which I believe came before the cards, but I could be wrong. And I actually read about that section in the book as well, just to kind of refresh my mind on the energies for that time period. And so that's been really helpful, and it does give me a visual reference. So I've enjoyed that. But the primary reading comes from using my Dark Days and my Dark Goddesses Tarot. So that's been a really fun experience. I do plan on working with these 2-3 decks for the whole year in this manner, so we'll see how that progresses along the way. So that is the Dark Goddesses Tarot, the Moonology Oracle cards, and the Dark Days Tarot. So that was some of the tarot and oracle decks that I worked with this month. I hope that you enjoyed checking all of them out. I will leave links for all of the decks featured in this video in the description box below. I hope you had a wonderful January, and I wish you many blessings moving into February. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.